All right, since we can't do golf carts in class due to the pandemic right now, we're gonna be kind of doing a quick service, or I'll be going through a service on this commercial 36 mower I have. I'll kind of go through how we change the oil, what filters we change, going through the blades, greasing the machine, checking tire pressure, and just kind of going over a piece of equipment before we kind of get ready for the season. A lot of this stuff's probably not going to be too new for you guys. Some of it may be. So what I'm going to do first is actually kind of run it for a while, probably a good 5 minutes, about half throttle outside, just to kind of warm the oil up. The reason being why we want to warm that oil up is to get any sludge or anything that has settled in the bottom of our engine itself in that oil pan to then come back into suspension. Right, once all that crap kind of comes back into suspension, then once we drain that oil out, it's going to flow easier because the oil is hot, and it's also going to carry a lot of that crud or contaminants in the oil out through that drain tube. If we were just to simply drain it out as is, a lot of that heavier particles, if there's any metal, anything that shouldn't be in that oil, it's more likely going to stay on the bottom of that oil pan and then kind of get recirculated back to the engine once we put new oil in it. So I kind of like to warm them up, let them run for a little while, and then we could drain the oil. So our next step, we'll kind of come back and I'll show you the process on how we drain the oil. All right, engine's all warmed up. So we're gonna actually tip the mower kind of more back. That way we can kind of get some positive drainage out of our crankcase into our oil pan. I have our oil pan on the back. I'm actually gonna use a 10mm wrench to drain our oil. It's actually a quick drain on this. So what I'm going to use is a jack stand, something that's going to support this mower up while we are working on it. Again, we don't want to use something that can possibly fall on us or crush us. So again, use the proper piece of equipment in order to kind of get the oil to drain. So we'll kind of position our pan on the back, kind of have a tube that runs all the way out. And then we can start draining our oil out. So I'm going to use a 10mm socket. Open this up. We should start getting some oil draining. Kind of open up our dipstick just to kind of let some air in there, and that'll kind of help the oil drain out. This time we can kind of do a quick inspection too to see how our oil is looking, if it's really dirty or if we see any metal particles on the dipstick end, then we know we might have some issues. So we just kind of want to do a good quick visual inspection. Also, while we kind of have it up in the air draining, we can check our air filter. Normally we don't have to change this every time. It's going to be dependent on use. So as long as it's fairly clean, which this one looks pretty good, I would need to actually blow this out. Put this cover off. Put this to the side. This little wing nut on top kind of loosens this hose clamp. So I can take this off and blow it out. So fairly easy, and we kind of see, again, it is a mower, so we have a lot of grass that's kind of embedded into the pleat. So I think just using some compressed air will kind of lightly blow this out, and this is still in pretty good shape. Probably next year it would be a good time to probably replace this for a new one. Just some other points while we have it up in the air. Again, while we're waiting for that oil to drain, is also to kind of go and grease the machine. I already kind of hit our 2 spindle bearings, so there are grease zerks on top of these spindles, and it's going to require a more of a high-speed bearing grease, which I have in this grease gun, as well as this kind of pivot arm here, which is in our belt tensioner. Just some other grease points we have on this machine, again, are our casters. So our caster is going to be our pivotal point. So there are a couple of grease fittings right inside there. It's just a few pumps will do. We don't want to over grease, as the grease kind of gets squirted out and you kind of have it showing. The more grease that shows, the more dirt and dust it's going to attract, which actually does the opposite effect and kind of destroys bearings quicker. So we don't want to just put just enough that's going to cover everything. Our wheels themselves are also going to have Zerk fittings on the inside to house those bearings. Jet, again, a few pumps of grease into there, nothing crazy, just to make sure that we're getting everything properly lubricated. Doing this maintenance now is going to save us, hopefully, some headaches down the road. Got all those greased. Another thing which we will do, well, not in this instance, is normally I'll sharpen the blades right now before we kind of start our season. I did purchase new blades just because the old ones were getting a little worn. So we'll kind of go in and install those as well. So we'll kind of let this drain down. We don't kind of want to rush this. We want to get as much of that old oil out as possible. Then we'll kind of come back and we'll show you guys draining of the oil filter, as well as installing new oil and a new filter. All right, so our oil's done draining. So while we still kind of have that air filter part, got it all blown out. So we'll kind of replace that. There is no direction on it. So we want to make sure that we install it just tightly so we don't have any crud getting back in there. Again, having that wing nut on the upper side is going to help us access that again. We just want to tighten that down. That way it doesn't fall off, and you can replace that cover and so it doesn't get stepped on or anything get damaged in that process. All right, from this point, we're going to actually just lower it back down. Make sure we don't have any more oil flowing out of it, which it looks like we're basically all good. So we'll go ahead and close off our oil drain. We don't have to make this too tight, because again, we don't want to strip anything out, but we just want it shut enough where nothing's going to possibly drain out of that. Take our oil away. Alright, again, before we kind of go further, let's do these blades. And keep that oil pan's out of the way. Raise this a little bit higher, tip it all the way back. And we still want to use a good proper jack stand, make sure that isn't going anywhere. Again, even kind of giving it a quick push, because we will be underneath there, and that's the last thing we want to do is have that possibly fall on us. So let me get the other blade ready. This is a twin bladed machine. Had mulching blades on before, and we'll kind of talk about those differences once I get these off. Alright, so the mulching blade design is to kind of do what the name kind of implies, is to basically recut the grass again as it gets chopped off. So it has, again, these kind of feathered wings on the back, which are toothed. So it's supposed to kind of re-chop that grass back up, as well as a kind of a stacked cutting edge design that this is where we're cutting the plant off, and then this upper blade is re-slicing it again to kind of chop it into finer material. I'm going to be using a regular standard, basically high lift blade, which then will just be more for a discharge. So I'll be using the discharge chute instead of a mulching type system. So we'll get these put back on. And it's important that the beveled edge is faced up into the mower deck, and we want the flat side of the blade facing down. It is possible to put these on backwards. It won't really cut very good if we do. Use our impact gun. back up. And we'll do the other one. Same process. Great thing about new blades is they're already sharpened, so we don't have to worry about doing that. I like to verify that that gun is actually tightening the blades. So I kind of go back with a ratchet. Just double check, because the last thing you want is a blade to possibly fall off. Pretty tight. Yeah, it's tight. Alright. So everything underneath should be all set. Set our mower back down. Got a small use our rag to clean up any mess we made. Alright, now I'm going to use have this an old kind of frying pan I could get underneath here that we could then drain our oil filter. So I'm going to use a oil filter wrench. That's just to take these off, all right? We never want to use an oil filter wrench to put the filter back on, right? Because it's technically only hand tight only. So once the O-ring or seal contacts the engine surface, and we just kind of go a little bit more with our hands, and that is enough. The reason I'm using this frying pan is there still is going to be some amount of oil that will come out of this. And again, I just don't want it a huge mess. So kind of just let that drip for a little bit. Everything still should be nice and warm and hot. Then we kind of take that oil that we gathered out of there. Same thing. The best thing I like to do is kind of almost what we call clean as you go. So as you make a mess, just kind of clean it up. Don't ever have like one big jumbled mess of oil everywhere or the pans laying around. It's just one more thing to trip on, then you have oil all over the floor, and then you're cursing. So try to make sure everything is cleaned up. So I got my new filter, I got my oil. It's another important thing to check to make sure you have the proper type of oil. Again, the proper weight. We talked about oil weights. This is going to require 10W30. How we know that is just kind of going through our owner's manual and figuring that out. Also need to know the proper filter. We could look at the old filter number or look at our owner's manual to get the proper filter for this mower. This one happens to be an AM125424. Again, that's the part number of this in order to change this. All right. Another important piece of information is the capacity of this engine. We don't fill this crankcase or this dipstick tube all the way up until the oil's flowing out, because then that's too much. All right, we're utilizing this reading on our dipstick and the capacity provided by our manufacturer. So going through the book, this is a little bit under 2 quarts of capacity, so we'll put in a full quart basically pretty quickly. And then we'll kind of keep checking as we're adding that second quart until we kind of come up to that level. what I talked about is contacting that O-ring surface. So this O-ring surface, which is kind of hard to see, I don't know if that kind of focuses enough, but you see how there's a rubber gasket on there. It's important that we verify that there is no gasket left on this, because if the old gasket was stuck, then we'd have a double gasket, which then would leak. So we want to make sure that this is a good, proper seal so that we don't have any leaks. If this oil filter was hanging in the vertical, we could go ahead and fill this filter up. But it's sitting in the horizontal, so if I did actually put oil in this, and as soon as I tipped it horizontally to go screw it on, I'll just have all the oil running all over the ground. So I'm just gonna put a little bit on top of this filter. And by a very little bit, you kind of see there, kind of dripped it on the ground, but there's just a tiny little bit on that face of it. And what I'm trying to do is lubricate that O-ring or that seal on top of the oil filter. The reason why we want to lubricate that seal is, again, it's going to be mating on that metal surface, and as we're twisting this filter, the last thing we want to do is try to bunch that seal up. So that thin coating of oil is crucial to getting this to seal properly. So once we have that oil on, then I could spin our filter on. So as soon as it contacts that surface, I can then go ahead and hand tighten it on. Again, basically a turn and a half, and that filter's going to stay on there. So just basically that turn and a half or one turn past tight is going to specify it again. And just to kind of verify that that's on there, we do not want to use our oil filter wrench to tighten the oil filter on. All right, this is important, and I will ask you guys this on the test. Do we use an oil filter wrench to put on an oil filter? The answer is no. All right, so again, we'll just kind of verify that that is snugged, hand tight only, wipe everything down. Then we can start filling with oil. Right before we start filling with oil, it's important to double check that our drain plug, or in this case, the drain valve, is shut. There have been instances, I have been guilty myself of doing it, that you start adding oil in, and as you're adding oil in, it's dumping out on the ground. So in order to save oil, we want to make sure that this is indeed shut. So like I said, we'll start with the new quart. That was a partial. So again, double checking, 10W30. Then we could add oil into our engine. This is something you kind of just want to do slowly. Some are going to take it quicker than others. This one being a smaller type of oil fill tube. If we tried to dump this whole quart in there all at once, it'd more likely kind of get an air bubble and then burp out all over the floor and create a mess. So we'll kind of, again, go through this slow. Almost there. And we don't have to be too particularly crazy to get every single drop of oil out of the quart container. There's always going to be a little bit left in there. And we can kind of let that sit just a little bit, just till it turns to a pretty fine trickle. Don't have to waste too much time. Now, even though we know that it's going to be about 2 quart capacity, I still like to double check. And again, sometimes our oil dipstick is going to indicate how we check the oil. A lot of people just turn this, stick it in here, turn it all the way down. But for this to check proper oil, it says for correct oil level, do not turn cap on thread. So we simply just dip this in. So instead of threading that down, we'll just place that on there. and then look at our level, and we're still on the add mark. So that tells me right there that I am basically free and clear to add a pretty good chunk of this second quart. We'll kind of let that settle down to the bottom there. Wipe our dipstick, and then give it another check. And we just don't want to screw it in on threads, we just want to simply place on the threads. So it looks like, kind of give us another reading. Still not there yet. Let's do it one more time just to verify. Again, kind of that measure twice, cut once. And that time it did kind of come up. Yeah, we're still right on the add, so I'm going to go ahead and dump a little bit more in. Again, it's important not to over add or put too much oil in here. If we overfill past that full mark, we could have internal damage. Again, the pressures could be too high. We could start clogging those crankcase breathers, kind of what we did and disassemble those engines. It could start pushing past the seals. It could push past our piston rings, and we could literally damage the engine with too much engine oil, just like if we had too little engine oil. So it's important to be right in that zone. So checking again, I'm still not quite there. I'm basically right in that middle zone. So I'm going to go ahead, and this was a partial quart. So I'm going to go ahead and dump that in. I still got one more, which we'll probably use a little bit of this. So we'll kind of double check again. And we're kind of in the zone there. So I'm going to actually call that good for right now. So are we done? Well, no. Our oil filter, since we didn't pre-fill it because it's on the horizontal, is not full yet. So as we turn this engine over or start it up, all that oil is going to pump and fill into our oil filter. So we're going to lose a lot of our oil. So even though we have a correct reading on our dipstick, we still may not have the correct amount of oil in this engine. So what we'll do is we'll kind of get it started up. Oil over our brakes. Again, we know we're not going to harm anything because it does have oil in it. So we'll kind of get it started up. We'll run it for just a couple of seconds, and then we'll shut it back down. That'll be enough to fill everything up. As we kind of let it run, let it pump that oil from our crankcase into our oil filter. Should be plenty of time on that. We get a new red. And we'll check it again. Just pulling it out is not going to really give us an accurate reading because the oil has kind of gotten splashed up on that dipstick. But as I look in there, there is barely anything on there. So that tells me we're not close yet. We're going to add some more oil in. Probably about a quarter of that quart. Let that settle down. We're getting there. We're just coming up into the operating range. So sometimes this does get a little frustrating because you think you need a lot and you really only need a little bit. It actually starts rising up fairly quickly. So checking on that, I could probably go a wee bit more here to the top of the operating range. I think I'm going to call that good. That's about 2 quarts right there. I'm going to double check this again. And that's where we want to be. So I don't know how guys you can see this and on this dipstick here. Kind of get it into focus, but see how we're just right at the full line. So between this mark and this mark, we're actually okay. It's only till we get to the bottom of the dipstick, if oil's just at the bottom, is where we have to add. So as long as we're in the middle, I would say, to the upper side of this, we're in the okay mark. We don't want to ever be way up into full. So now we have our oil loaded up. We can then screw our cap in. All right, and just some other checkpoints I'm gonna do, probably do it off camera, but I just want you guys to kind of go through it. Again, this does have a small element style fuel filter on here. I've been changing this every other year because I try to use non-ethanol fuel. It's clear, so we can actually look in there. We talked about how important it is to have clean fuel. If we have dirty fuel, if we omit that fuel filter, we can clog our carburetor up, which will then make it run poorly or it won't even run at all. So just a good quick verification on that fuel filter, looking in it. If there's any dirt or crud sitting on the bottom, that's probably time to change it. If not, we could probably get by another season. Tire pressures are also important. We want to go with the manufacturer's recommended tire pressure, and sometimes that will be on the side of our tire. So either we can read the side of the tire and it's going to say operating pressure, or look in the manual. A lot of times people kind of go through this and say, oh, max pressure is 20 PSI, so they'll put 20 PSI in it. Max pressure is different than the operating pressure. So we want to make sure that we're following our operating pressure for our tire or for the mower itself, rather than just going with the max pressure. Right? And then we can just basically do another quick visualization or visual check. Make sure everything is tight, make sure our oil is indeed shut off, make sure the oil filter is clean and snug. We can also just look as we ran it that last time, make sure there is no leaks, nothing is leaking out of this. And then we also, since we have greased everything in the upper end, it's important that we always replace all guards. Kind of going through those safety talks you guys did. We do not want to operate any piece of equipment if it's missing a guard. That guard is put on there for a reason. Again, they come off to do service type jobs such as this. So we don't want to ever run the equipment without these guards. We then go ahead, everything tighten down. And at this point, we should be in for hopefully a trouble-free season. So if you guys have any questions on this, please feel free to email me. Again, this will be part of our exam I will ask you questions regarding what I kind of did with this equipment service. So this is not going to be applicable for everything, but it is going to, a lot of stuff is going to be the same if we're changing a small mower, a tractor, or a car, or a truck. We're still going to be changing oil filters, engine oil, fuel filters, possibly spark plugs if we need to do those as well. And I didn't change those on this because, again, it doesn't get that much use. But usually about a car, they're going to have recommended intervals for all these components. So check your operator's manuals when those service intervals are. And don't feel, I guess, overwhelmed, or don't be afraid to tackle something. You guys will make mistakes as you kind of first do these things, but it will get easier and easier as you go on. So again, any questions, feel free to email me, and we'll be seeing you guys on the next one.